Hi, my name is Madeleine Cravens, and I'm going to be reading a poem from my forthcoming book, Pleasure Principle. And this poem is called Leaving. Not the pleasure of lovers, but the pleasure of letters, a pleasure like weather, delayed and prepared for. Not the pleasure of lessons, but the pleasure of errors, of nightmares, of actors in the black box of a theater. Not the pleasure of present, but the pleasure of later, the pleasure of letters and weather and terror, asleep by the lake, unable to answer, the pleasure of candles, their wax on the table, not the pleasure of saviors, but the pleasure of errors, not the pleasure of marriage, but the pleasure of failure, the pleasure of characters like family members, their failures and errors, their laughter and weather, the pleasure of water, terrible rivers, not the pleasure of empire, but the pleasure of after, our failure to keep an accurate record, not the pleasure of tethers, but the pleasure of strangers, the terrible strangers who will become your lovers, not the pleasure of novels, but the pleasure of anger, your failure to answer all of my letters, the pleasure of daughters, the pleasure of daughters writing letters in April, the failure of orchards, the terror of mothers, not the pleasure of planners, but the pleasure of errors.